Contracting is the least reformed business process in any organization, and it is a business process, not a legal process. Contracting, legal is a stakeholder within that contracting process, And why is it the least reformed business process? Well, because it's multidisciplinary. When you think about contracting, you have to think about it from a buy-side and a sell-side perspective. You have to think about it from a pre-award and a post-award perspective. There are so many functions, people that touch contracts and the contracting process at any point in time during that life cycle. We conduct a lot of research as World CC, and one study confirmed that on average, 29% of an organization's workforce is somehow involved in contracting.
Thanks so much for joining another edition of The Never-Ending Climb for Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, I have the great pleasure of interviewing Sally. Now, Sally is a reformed lawyer, thank goodness, and she's also a mother and the global leader of the World CC, World Commerce and Contracting. So, yes, we're going to talk about contracts today. Sally, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sean, thank you so much for having me. It's really lovely to be here. Lovely to be sharing lots, I hope, of interesting information. I'm very passionate about the world of contracts, so can't wait to get into the conversation.
So good. I'm thinking about how, as a nonprofit, servant leadership has a very special meaning for you, not just in the context of the organization, but as leaders and what that means and the way we show up for our teams and our customers. Can you share a little bit more about that and how that ties into contracting?
Yeah, servant leadership matters hugely to me. And of course, it's a vital component of running and leading a not-for-profit organization. I feel that servant leadership is something that some people really get, but it's something that's quite missing in many corners of our world at the moment. But for sure, I serve a global community of somewhere in the region of 80,000 members that we have around the world, and it is my duty to serve them. The association exists because of them. And for me, actually, there's a strong link between the servant leadership in the context of world commerce and contracting and everything that we stand for. Our vision as an association is a world where all trading relationships deliver both social and economic benefit. I said at the beginning, I'm passionate about contracts, and contracts need to be these servants as well. We talk often about the concept of boundary objects, but ultimately contracts need to be designed to serve the people that are working under them, around them, with them, making their jobs easier, not harder. And ultimately, contracts need to deliver positive outcomes. We enter into contracts because we want a positive outcome, not because we want to end up in court.
And I love the focus there. There's a few things. There's the stability of law and the primacy of a set of rules that is so important across the world, and having those sets of shared rules where commerce can rely on shared rules that are stable, and then to be able to set the contracts up to handle ideally what we intend to happen. And also, there's maybe a little bit of time on how we keep things on the straight and narrow and where we want them to go. This really comes down to the outcomes that we're all solving for as leaders. There's this myth that contracts are just, lawyers speak or whatever. I find this remarkably unhelpful because there's so many people out there that think contracts are a legal function, but they're fundamentally a business function. They're a commerce function, aren't they?
They certainly are. And sadly, we talk about myths, but it isn't a myth, unfortunately, because the reality is that there are too many people that view contracts as these legal weapons and see them as impenetrable as well. I mean, yeah, contracting is the least reformed business process in any organization. And it is a business process, not a
It is.
legal process. Contracting, legal is a stakeholder within that contracting process, And why is it the least reformed business process? Well, because it's multidisciplinary. When you think about contracting, you have to think about it from a buy-side and a sell-side perspective. You have to think about it from a pre-award and a post-award perspective. There are so many functions, people that touch contracts and the contracting process at any point in time during that life cycle. We conduct a lot of research as World CC, and one study confirmed that on average, 29% of an organization's workforce is somehow involved in contracting. Now, that 29% of the workforce is not all legal. So,
thank goodness. Sorry, that was my outside voice. In all seriousness, though, this really tells me that the 29%, those are the people that are making the supply chain happen. Those are the people that are creating the agreements that become the foundation of so many amazing things happening going forward. This, to me, opens an invitation for not just the 29%, but even more, to really reframe the idea of what good looks like for an appreciation of commerce, of contracting, of what the terms and conditions, but what's the point, right? We're making a contract so that we all have a solid record of what we agreed on and what we're doing together. And then there's a little, there's some stuff about, well, we don't want it to go sideways, but just in case. But this, like the focus of results go where energy flows. And here we are with most of the energy that goes into contracting, focusing around things that are very difficult to read. So this commercial awareness and the readability tie together to me in a massive opportunity to make things better.
Yeah, well, so commercial awareness, I argue, is this golden thread of capability that needs to run through an entire organization. And when you think about contracts, actually, you can pretty much apply the 80-20 rule to them. 80% of the content of a contract is actually about the business relationship. 20% is legal. And yet we really focus so much of our attention, again, back to some data points from our research. We run a regular most negotiated terms study, which confirms that we typically negotiate for the divorce, not for the marriage. So we focus our attention on everything that is going to come into play when it all goes horribly wrong. So limitation of liability, warranties, indemnities, all of these things, which everybody knows. Everybody will be nodding their head now going, yeah, that's what we do. We know that's what everybody does because they tell us year after year. And what we spend our time negotiating is not what we say is most important. Of course, what we say is most important is actually we need to talk about the responsibilities of the parties. We need to articulate the scope of works. We need to keep revisiting what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve. We don't enter into contracts to end up in court. We enter into contracts, and the business wants us to enter into contracts because we want a successful outcome. So the challenge we have is that contracts are typically viewed as these legal weapons. They are written in incredibly complex language as well. And as such, they sit in a drawer. The moment they're signed, they get put in a drawer because they're not actually a useful tool for the business to deliver the outcome. So then it's a question of pot luck. And we'll get the contract out when it all goes wrong because that's what it's there for. What we try and advocate for at World CC is we've got to think differently about the purpose of a contract. And actually, we've got another study on the purpose of a contract. But it's funny. I mean, the purpose of a contract will depend on who you ask. But ultimately, the purpose of a contract is to drive successful outcomes. And if we treat it not as a legal weapon, but as an operational guide, then it becomes a really useful tool to help drive the outcomes that everybody is desirous of.
What I really love about that is that reinforcement of the guide and the clarity. So much of business, in my experience, comes down to the clarity that we can create and then the velocity that we can execute with. And then that unlocks all kinds of value and margin. The clarity when it is unintelligible to folks that would try to read it in a contract. And then well, what's the point of this contract? Oh, all of this just to say they're licensing some software, or all of this just to say that these widgets are going to be supplied on this ratable agreed framework, or, this employment agreement, or whatever this, asset sale, acquisition, whatever it is. The clarity of, and the amount of real estate, the amount of energy that goes into this is what we're actually trying to do, as opposed to, what if? That feels like such a massive opportunity. And I love that you're advocating for this, because fundamentally, most contracts are just focused on the wrong things.
Yeah. Well, and they're unintelligible and impenetrable by most normal human beings. So, Sean, another data point, 88% of business users have told us that they don't understand the contracts that their organizations enter into. That's a really shocking statistic. And when you think about contracts and the concept of contracts being there to manage and mitigate risk, if 88% of your organization doesn't understand those contracts, and at least, or on average, 29% of that organization is involved, deeply involved in contracting, then we're driving risk into the process. We're driving risk into the business. So we, again, advocate for designing for users. User-based design is something that we all embrace in every walk of life. We look for things to be intuitive, intelligible, simple, and why can't contracts be that way? They can be. And in fact, we do a lot of work with organizations who are starting to go on this journey now. And you can simplify language, use plain language, incorporate graphics and timelines, and incorporate colors and
not just Times New Roman,
not just Times New Roman, and capital letters as well in certain ones.
Oh, the contracts that yell at us.
Exactly. So, exactly. So. But all of these things are possible without in any way negatively impacting the legal efficacy of the agreement. And so, again, if we believe that contracts should be there to help us to achieve successful business outcomes, we have to apply that user-based design mentality to how we approach contracting.
It's so, so, so powerful. I've found myself considering, you know better than I do if this is true, but I'd come across something that said that a simpler, more plain language contract will take precedent over something that is extremely long and complicated when the premise and the intention is clear. And I have to imagine that simplicity, like so many things in life, simple is not necessarily easy, but it takes work, it takes energy, but simple is way better than complicated.
Yeah.
And that feels like it frames so much of the opportunity around our contracts, is getting back to something that's simple, that focuses on the outcomes that we want to create.
Yeah, and focuses in on the users as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a wonderful, and it's slightly off tangent, but a wonderful and extreme example of user-based design, and that is a comic contract. There is a wonderful comic contract. Yeah. And that has been designed, and boy, the lawyer that was involved in that particular project said it was one of the hardest things that he ever had to do. So he had to translate effectively a traditional, legal, heavy, text-heavy employment agreement into a comic. Why? Because this was an organization in South Africa that was employing people on orange groves, and many of those individuals were either illiterate or semi-literate. So they were being forced to sign employment agreements that they didn't understand.
Wow.
So there's a big, long story around that, which I won't go into now. But, that is a fabulous, extreme, but fabulous example of how user-based design can be applied. And you know what? Those individuals on that farm, the impact of that comic contract was extraordinary. They felt validated as human beings. They felt respected by their organization. that is the power of a contract.
And when people don't remember what you said or what you wrote in the contract and filed in the drawer, they do remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And the outcome that we're looking for after you have agreed on a contract is so powerful. And I love the way that can merge together.
Yeah.
Is there something else that you would encourage sort of as a, if somebody's watching this, what would you want them to remember 6 weeks, 6 months later, if they take away only one thing from our conversation here?
That contracts need a new personality, that they should be valued. They do. And you know what? There was a wonderful quote from the Nobel Prize Committee when it awarded a Nobel Prize for Economic Science to 2 professors who worked on a study on incomplete contracts. And that quote was, "Modern economies are held together by innumerable contracts." So contracts are fundamental to economies and to society. And they need to be treated with this different approach. They are not legal instruments. They are first and foremost economic instruments.
Those economic instruments, those business instruments that are becoming like one of these, something that is so easy to use. I love that. I really, really have enjoyed our conversation, Sally. I'm so grateful for you taking the time today to share your experience, wisdom, and vision for what good looks like in contracting. And
Well, thank you.
So grateful. Thank you again. And for all of you watching, this has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement and Contracting. Thank you so much, everybody. Have an amazing week.